started. Thank you all for coming. It was brought to my attention that I say this word wrong. I have been saying this word wrong all year, so thank you. I'll say it right now. This meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with Emergency Ordinance number 20A16, an emergency ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID-19 disaster. The committee members who are electronically present at this meeting are, I am going to call on everybody again to say your own name, but I will start. I'm Allie Pesh. I live by Mint Springs, and I'm the chair of the Crozet CAC, and I'll just go down my list and you guys can introduce yourselves. Josh.
Josh Rector, live in the Whitehall area.
Thanks. I see Tom.
Tom Loach, CCAC, and I live over in Bayberry, Wolf John Gap.
Thanks. Costas.
Costas Alberis, I live out on 250.
Valerie.
I'm Valerie Long. I live in Old Trail.
Thanks. Sean.
Hello, Sean Bird, live off of St. George.
Doug, are you back?
I'm back temporarily up on Whitehall Road.
And Mike?
Hi, Mike Kunkel. I live in Quarry Farm.
Thanks. And like I said, I think Joe is going to be a little late. And we also have Ann Malik and Jenny Moore, our supervisor and planning commissioner for our Whitehall district. And then I know Matt and Sandy are supposed to be here tonight too, so they'll probably jump on. Right.
Matt is in the waiting room, I think. So he has
maybe we can move him up.
Question.
Matthew, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. Matthew Slats, Jarman's Gap Road.
Thanks. Thanks, Mike. All right. Did I miss anybody else? The persons responsible for receiving public comment are the Crozet Community Advisory Committee. The opportunities for the public to access and participate in the electronic meeting are posted on the Albemarle County calendar. And staff members present are Charles Rapp, Rachel Falkenstein, Carolyn Schaefer, who will help us run the meeting, Tori Kanelopoulos, and is that everybody? Michaela. There you are. It's like people move around. All right. All right. So the chat is disabled. Don't use the chat. That is the official county SOP, which we figured out over the last couple of months. And the Q&A, that's meeting by meeting, and there's a lot of FOIA problems with Q&A. So what we're doing is leaving it on because I think it's important for us to have an option for administrative questions. Sometimes people get kicked out, need to be moved to panelists. Sometimes there's, a materials link that we can share, but the Q&A is only going to be visible to panelists, and only Carolyn is going to address it during the meeting. However, any comments that are entered into the Q&A do become part of the public record. They'll be, part of the minutes of this meeting. And so with that in mind, if you have a comment, you should, first choice would be to raise your hand. We can unmute attendees one by one and take comments or questions that way. But then I guess I would also, Charles and I discussed this about today's meeting. If you have a comment that is, pretty much verbatim what another attendee or panelist is already expressing, feel free to go in there and just say, I agree with that comment, and it'll get recorded with the meeting. But for FOIA purposes, dial-in people can't see them. And for also just the time constraints of the meeting, we're going to not be engaging with the Q&A. So even though panelists might be able to see the Q&A, we're not going to, I'm looking at it now, honestly, but only to say that Sandy apparently, there she is, was logged. So that's kind of a good use of the Q&A. So Carolyn will monitor that for administrative things, and otherwise it will just go into the minutes, and you can go ahead and comment there, or as always, you are free to email staff, email Ann and Jenny, email me. But if you have things to chime in with on the Q&A, we're going to leave it open for basically for the public record. So hopefully that works. And as always, you can raise your hand and we will get to comments as we have time, and as it works with the presentation. Hopefully that makes sense. The committee members, if any of you have anything to add, just let me know. I'm also fine with committee members unmuting and chiming in because I don't always see you, but I do try to leave it on gallery mode. So if you gesture, and also I am a big fan of thumbs up, either Zoom thumbs up or visual thumbs up, and we can move on to minutes. So Joe sent the minutes, and I would just need a motion to see.
So moved.
Thanks, Brian.
Second.
All right. I can go ahead and call for a vote. Everybody in favor of approving the minutes can unmute, or
Yeah.
All right. Any opposed? Any corrections? Okay. Next up, we have elections. So I tend to I don't know if Ann got any email nominations, but if you did, you could raise them now. Otherwise, people can raise their hand and nominate people right now for both chair, vice chair, and secretary. I think we had a nomination, we had some nominations. They weren't exactly formal at the last meeting. So maybe for the sake of formality, we need to raise them again now. Did you get any emails, Ann?
I did not. I'm sorry.
Okay.
And if someone sent one this afternoon, I have not found it yet, but I will go get it.
No worries. I know Ann's been in a work session all afternoon too.
Ally?
Mm-hmm.
He's not here, so I'm just going to go ahead and nominate him. I would nominate Joe to be the chairman.
Okay. Joe also nominated himself for vice chair.
Too late.
Well, what if I nominate Ally? Then we have that possibility of Joe taking the vice chair for this year and stepping up next year. Is there an issue?
Oh, I thought Ally, you were stepping down. I didn't know that. So if that's not the case, I nominate Ally.
I think we did away with the term limit that last year. So I can, as long as I still have 2 more years. So I think Joe's idea was, that I would be chair this year, he would be vice chair, and then next year would be my last year serving, and he would take over chair for that year. However, if Joe is vice, then we need a secretary.
Nobody wants that job.
So
Ally, do we just vote on everybody at one time, or do we vote position by position?
we can vote position by position. So
that may make that problem a little bit easier.
Okay.
Right? Or would it? I don't know that it will, but
it says on my sheet that nominations do not require a second. So we need, if we are doing chair, we can make a motion to close nominations, leaving just me and Joe, unless you've retracted Joe's. It's a little awkward since Joe's not here.
So the only thing is, I think Joe has to be present to accept the nomination.
We could postpone this to
No,
to later in the meeting.
I withdraw my nomination of Joe.
Okay, well, we can do chair. We can wait for Joe for vice. He just had a baby, so congrats to Joe.
Yeah.
He's waiting for his wife to get home from her vaccination appointment, and then he'll pop on. So why don't we vote for me? Thank you all for the nomination. If I have a motion to close nominations for chair.
So moved.
Okay. Anybody want to second that?
Second that.
All right. This is so awkward. Does everybody vote in favor of me being chair again?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you all for your confidence and support. I accept. And I am looking forward to handing this over next year. So it's been fun. I guess we can, yeah, if Joe has to be here, I'm not really sure, but we can just say that Joe, that we can just vote on that, but still leave the issue. If does anybody want to nominate anybody else for vice chair?
Did Joe accept vice chair?
He did, because he nominated himself via email.
So if he did that, then it's presumed that he would still want to do it. So
Okay.
I don't think he has to be present, but
Okay.
someone who's more familiar with Robert's rules can veto that. But given that he's self-nominated, I think he's probably willing to accept.
I think so. So yeah, I'm absolutely no expert at Robert's rules, which you probably can all tell, but we can go with Joe, and if there are no other vice chair nominations, someone can. Thank you. I don't know who's taking the minutes of this right now, but I guess we have a recording.
Well, I'm working on minutes right now.
Oh, thank you, Anne. All right, so everybody voting in favor of Joe as vice chair.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed? Okay, so we'll have Joe as vice chair. Thank you, Joe. And we open the floor for nominations for secretary.
Allie, I'm happy to do it if no one else is interested.
Thank you, Valerie.
This is wonderful. Valerie will be either the third or the fourth attorney who has been secretary of CCAC. So that's great. Thank you, Valerie.
We learned to type fast in law school.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. No, I appreciate it. And
I will send you my notes for assistance as much as it may or may not be helpful. So.
And I will go ahead and say that next year, when I am no longer having to run the meeting, I will take over as secretary for my last year. So anyway, any other nominations for secretary, or do we have a motion to close that?
So moved.
Okay, that'll be a move and a second.
Second.
Thank you. Everybody in favor of Valerie as secretary?
Aye.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you so much. Any opposed? Okay, thank you all for volunteering, and everybody for being on the committee as well. I guess we have perhaps some new members next month, Anne?
Yes, we had there are 7 slots. We have had 4 people file, and they were all appointed last meeting, the first Wednesday in March. So if there are other people who would like to apply, they are welcome to do that.
Okay. Thank you. Looking forward to that. And is that all my business? Can we move on? Let me know if I forgot.
Ann, are you allowed to share the names with us?
Oh, Allie and Sandy Hausman and Doug Bates and Mark McKinney.
Oh, okay.
Is from West Holland, who organized wonderful meetings with VDOT and is very interested in all things planning. So he will be joining next time.
Okay.
And
Well,
so we have 3 more slots, and I'm looking
and that
forward to-
includes and some people who could potentially renew still.
as far as I know, yes, I'm unaware of who is aged out and who is not. So I
Okay.
Travis to help with that. If anybody's confused about whether they've aged out or not, just let me know and I'll find out.
Yeah, and the new Albemarle County webpage also has has a good roster with all that information.
good.
So you can
Wonderful.
check that. All right. Well, it's 7:18, so I will hand it over to staff.
All right, thank you, Allie. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rachel Falkenstein. I'm Planning Manager, and I am joined tonight by my colleagues, Michaela Accardi and Tori Canelopoulos, and also Charles Rapp. Bear with us for one moment. Michaela is going to share her screen and get the presentation up. Thank you, Michaela. So we're going to talk this evening about land use, and hopefully most of you have seen by now the draft land use chapter that we provided in advance of the meeting, but if you haven't had a chance to read it, that's okay too. We're going to go through the majority of the content this evening. If you can go to the next slide, Michaela. So our agenda for tonight is to review the draft land use chapter, and we have 5 topics that we'll cover. We'll start off with just a summary of what we've included in the land use, and then we have kind of 4 content topics that we want to touch on. These are all topics that have generated probably the most discussion with the community and the CAC so far. So we'll get into the details of those. And then we'll turn the rest of the time over for you all for question and answer and discussion. And we'll share our next steps as well. So moving on to the draft land use chapter, we'll start with just a little overview of kind of how the process we went through to draft it, and a little bit of the content. So this graphic might look familiar to the CAC members who have been with us the whole time. This came out of our scope document that we shared out at the beginning of the process, and that we kind of built in a little bit of a feedback loop as we went through the process. And if you recall, we've had 3 kind of phases that we've broken our work up into. The first is the visioning and guiding principles phase. That was our phase 1. So we kind of did this feedback loop where we got some feedback through various engagement opportunities, and then came back with consumer recommendations to get feedback on, and then carried those forward into phase 2, where we had some more specific recommendations and goal drafting. And then phase 3 is where we are now, and that's the content development and drafting of kind of the final pulling everything together into a chapter. So to kind of develop that content, we had all virtual engagement because of COVID. We've been virtual for this phase of work. Several CAC meetings through the summer and fall of 2020. We had the online engagement opportunities. And then, just general feedback we've received through email, comments, discussions with community members and stakeholders. And we've also had 2 planning commission work sessions. So kind of all of that feedback came together to create the content you see in the draft tonight. And we're going to go through that in a little bit more detail now. So next slide, Michaela. Our chapter summary, this provides kind of just an outline of what's in the draft chapter. Again, hopefully you've all had a chance to see it. And if you haven't yet, you can go on our website and go on the CAC page and pull it up, and feel free to follow along during the presentation. But I'll remind you that this is a working draft. There are some sections that need some more work. We have some placeholders in there. We're still developing graphics and images to support some of the narrative. The land use content itself is still, a working draft. We have this meeting, we have public engagement that we'll put up online. And then we have a board meeting coming up. So all of that feedback will continue to refine the draft as we go along.
Excuse me, Allie and Rachel.
Yes.
Are we going to be able to have a conversation about this as it goes along, like at the very beginning, the overview and background, or are you hoping that we will just wait till your entire presentation is done? Because I have some things that are very early on, and I'd like to be able to deal with those things rather than wait for an hour and then try to recover. So Up to you, but just let me know what you want to do.
So the way we structured it was we were going to go through the whole presentation first and then have time at the end. We probably will have about 20 minutes of presentation and then the rest of the time for discussion. Though if that's problematic, we can build in pauses if that's your preference. I'll leave that up to Allie.
Allie, that would be my preference.
Yeah, I guess if we can just at least pause after the first bullet point and let Doug see, and we can see how it goes.
Okay. The only fear is that we don't get through it all, but
Yeah.
if we can keep a close eye on time, we can.
I think we can just try to, limit comment, but still we'll move forward. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. So we'll pause after we get through the downtown neighborhoods. That was the first bullet. Okay, so to continue on the chapter.
Wait, I'm sorry. The first bullet is overview and background, and it's at that very first guiding principle that I have my most fundamental question.
Oh, so the bullet, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I didn't know you meant the bullet on this slide.
I meant the bullet on this slide, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so maybe we can, you can keep not knowing what the next slide is, then we'll take a few minutes for some grand comment, overarching comments before we get into the details here.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll pause. I think I have a couple more slides and then we'll pause then.
Thanks.
So the chapter summary is here. Again, this is not an outline of the presentation. This is an outline of the content in the chapter. Just a reminder, as I said, this is a draft. Also a reminder, this is one chapter in a larger master plan that we'll have. So this is the first chapter we're rolling out, but we'll also have a content on transportation. There'll be a chapter on conservation. There'll be an implementation chapter, and then also an introduction chapter that kind of provides some background and context. Michaela, if you can go to the next slide. So I was going to go now into the changes, but if you would like me to pause here and provide your question or your feedback on the overview, we could do that now.
Allie, would you like me to go ahead? I'll go ahead.
Sorry, I've been talking to you as yes, go ahead. And I'm just assuming that you and Tom both just had some comment, since we did already have a chance to go over to look at the materials, I think it seems appropriate that you guys just go ahead and say your overarching comment.
Right. Well, mine is on the guiding principle for land use within Crozet. It says support and strengthen Crozet's history as a self-sustaining town while ensuring that new and infill development is compatible in scale and design with what? Is my question. You can't have a comparison with nothing. So I need to know if the compatibility is with itself or with the neighborhood model. I just need to know what we're comparing.
I think that's good feedback.
That's my question.
Okay, I think the intent was with the small town identity and the scale that would be appropriate there, but we can take that feedback and look at revisions to clarify.
Okay, Rachel, that's great. I just know that things are in the eye of the beholder, and if you don't make it very specific, then it's whatever you imagine it's compatible to is the right answer. I would suggest that you compare it to the neighborhood model.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Tom, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I think the section on guiding principles should be removed. There are already a set of guiding principles that were in the first master plan in 2004, and they were repeated in the second master plan in 2010. There are 7 guiding principles, and I think we should stay with the guiding principles that have stayed with us for all these years. The second thing is, I don't know if it goes into either land use overview or existing conditions, but I'd like to see 2 statements added. And one statement is a restatement of the original intent of the consultants in the master plan that Crozet would develop out in about 20, a build out of about 20 years to a population of 11,200 to 12,000, and that we have reached that mark. The second statement I'd like to see in either of those sections is that there exists at this time significant information from both county and state transportation planners that there exists a significant problem with traffic and transportation in Crozet that will not be resolved within the next 5 years, and this should be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Hey, Ali, it's Costas. I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, Rachel, just one question. One of the terms, and I'll get hung up on literal statements, is self-sustaining. And that, what is that? When you say self-sustaining, could you define what the intent of that statement is? Because if it means we're going to have as many jobs as we have people that live in Crozet, we know that's not ever going to happen. So what does self-sustaining mean?
I think that was an acknowledgement of a little bit of the culture of Crozet. We trying to represent what we feel like we heard from the feedback, but if folks don't feel it represents the feedback or what you'd like to see as a guiding principle, we'd be happy to revisit it. But the self-sustaining culture is that you all kind of take issues on head on and kind of pull together as a community, and really a lot of the history is with employment uses there, and having those jobs early on, and that's kind of the history of why Crozet came to be, of the railroad community and some of that history. So I think it's trying to acknowledge that, but if we don't feel that's accurate, we'd be happy to look at it again.
Yeah, no, and I think, I mean, when we talk about sustaining of culture, or I think that's one statement. When we talk about trying to catch up with, self-sustaining in that we have jobs for all the people that live here, I think that's a very different thing. So just so we bring clarity to that, I think sustaining the culture of Crozet, sustaining the community as it's intended, I think that's very real and reasonable and makes a lot of sense. So it just needs to be in context, and maybe I misread it.
Yeah, it's
when I think of self-sustaining, yep, go ahead. That's it.
I was just gonna say, it's like, like you said, Rachel, this is not the first chapter of the plan, so we're not seeing what guiding principles you have composed for the introduction chapter. So we're not, it's, I think that maybe some bristling is happening because this is really all we've seen so far as a guiding principle in actual text. So Tom, did you have more to say?
Yeah, if we're still on the same page, or if again, I'm going to go back and say that we should use the guiding principles that were both in the first and in the second, if you want me to read them, but there are seven, but people can look at them and decide for themselves and come back and give an opinion on that. But to me, they're a good set of principles that we had. And if we're still on the same page, should I go on, or we're just with?
If by the same page you mean just the cover picture,
existing conditions and future growth.
Okay. Sure. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, on that, as far as the second paragraph about infill, I'm not sure what that has to do with existing conditions. I don't think it's required. As far as supporting affordable housing, again, it's in the guiding principles that I mentioned, the 7 guiding principles, and it has nothing to do with that. We've always supported affordable housing and that, so I'm not sure. I think that whole section can be removed as well.
Why don't we? Yeah, I mean, why don't we go ahead and hear, Rachel, what else you're gonna say, and then get into specific changes to the draft you sent us.
Sure. And one thing I would like to say, I forgot to say this at the beginning, is that we're going to put the draft online. We'll have public input up. People can comment through public input. We'll also hopefully have the draft in a format people can go page by page and send suggestions or comments for copy edits or suggestions where we should have some more clarity or, you know, changes you'd like to see kind of page by page. I think the intent.
Okay, can I just ask, will that be before it goes to the board? Because
Yes.
that's, okay.
Yeah, that will go up hopefully if we can pull it together by the end of this week, if not early next week. It will be on.
Okay.
So yeah, I think tonight I would love just like general questions, discussion about like big picture themes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the guiding principle statement is you know is a general feedback theme. So I appreciate that, but we don't have time to get into each page probably. But I think since the guiding principle is in big text and repeated in the document, that was something we could get into. But I think we can go ahead and listen to your presentation and before we get into any more nitty gritty.
So just kind of overall, the draft before you, I wanted to make a couple of points about some of the changes that are reflected from the 2010 master plan. I would say the majority of the land use changes, this is to the map itself now, are kind of cleanup related changes, and to kind of do two things: to try and bring greater consistency across all of the county's master plans in terms of our land use categories. And the second is to bring consistency with existing zoning where appropriate, to make sure that expectations are, you know, we set expectations for what development can happen when existing zoning is there to allow development. As far as overall growth projections, they remain very similar to the 2010 master plan. The vacant parcels, as you all know, you live here, you experience it, are mostly built out. There are a few vacant parcels left, and we've had a lot of discussion on those, but for the most part, are relatively minor. And then we've tried to capture the overall engagement themes that we've heard throughout this process, retaining that small town identity, having growth that's appropriately scaled, and then really centering growth to downtown as the commercial and cultural hub of the community. Next slide, Michaela. So this is just a side-by-side graphic. I know the scale is not such that you can see each parcel change, but I think this is really just to reflect that the 2020 land use plan looks pretty similar to the 2010 land use plan. You can see the majority is the yellow, neighborhood density low, but you have some kind of centers of activity that where your red colors and brown colors show up. Those are really carried forward to the 2020 land use plan. Next slide, Michaela. And so this gets into kind of the content of what we wanted to cover in our presentation this evening. We'll go through each of these topics in a little more detail. So I'm not going to go through each of them now, but we have 4 main topics we want to cover: downtown neighborhoods, middle density residential, and also just related a change to urban density residential, green space parcels, and then Old Trail. So I'm going to start us off with the downtown neighborhoods topic and just go through that quickly, what changes we've made since you all saw it in 2010. You can go to the next slide, Michaela. So the feedback we heard in phase 1 about the downtown neighborhoods are kind of summarized here. They're kind of just themes of the feedback we heard. Concern about neighborhoods around downtown experiencing tear downs, and then also experiencing new construction that would be out of scale with some of those existing neighborhoods. So we've heard a desire for more protection for some of these homes, especially the historic homes, and those that are existing affordable housing in some of these neighborhoods. And we heard support for some housing types that folks thought would be in keeping with some of these neighborhoods: bungalow courts, small single family conversions, accessory dwellings, and live work are some examples. So moving forward to phase 2, we got into more specific recommendations and started to look at maps and what land use recommendations should come out of that. And if you recall, we proposed a downtown neighborhoods overlay for the neighborhoods around downtown. And we heard through the CAC meetings in the fall, concern about the inclusion of Pleasant Green within that boundary, DNO, meaning downtown neighborhoods overlay, concern about inadequate infrastructure to support new density here, and then concern that there was not enough clarity in it so that there wasn't a cap on the density and the infill wasn't defined. And when we brought it to the Planning Commission, they echoed some of these concerns. They felt like more specifics about design was needed, more specifics about some of the regulatory things such as parking. And they thought a more appropriate tool would be a historic neighborhoods overlay for some of these areas. So moving forward to the draft before you this evening, our recommendation has changed based on that feedback. We've removed the downtown neighborhoods overlay from the land use chapter and have instead included some narrative about these downtown neighborhoods. And we're making a recommendation for a downtown neighborhoods architectural and cultural resources study. A portion of the study is kind of already done, and that's the portion that covers the historic district within Crozet. But there are some other neighborhoods that people pointed out that have important cultural and historic contexts that we wanted to include in this updated study. And then based on that study, hopefully come up with some tools and recommendations for neighborhood preservation. The boundary that we show in the narrative is shown here on the right-hand side of the screen. And you'll see that we removed Pleasant Green from the boundary because we heard that folks didn't feel like that was appropriate. Wasn't the same kind of character as some of these other neighborhoods that were more historic. So that summarizes the downtown neighborhoods changes. And I want to point out one other thing related to downtown, and that's about downtown itself. If you can go to the next slide, Michaela.
Can we hold on a second and discuss the downtown neighborhood overlay and things related to the downtown neighborhoods?
Let's just hear this one last slide on downtown and then pause.
Sure. So I'll have this slide and one more and then I'll pause.
Okay.
For downtown residential, the 2010 Crozet master plan has some language about the importance of downtown, and we wanted to carry that forward. But the recommendation within the 2010 plan calls for ground story commercial or retail uses in all of downtown. And that residential should be clearly secondary to commercial or employment uses. The county did a recent market study for a retail study for Crozet, and this was as part of agreement with the developer of Crozet Square. And they found that approximately about 40,000 feet of demand for retail downtown, which isn't a ton of retail space. And that includes not just retail, but service and restaurant uses as well. And so if you think about the whole of the Crozet Square, the Barnes Lumber redevelopment, having ground floor retail, there probably just isn't the demand for it right now. So if you move forward to the next slide, Michaela. So we have some language in there that kind of acknowledges this. Acknowledges that there's a limited retail market for Crozet right now, and suggests that some single-use residential buildings might be appropriate, especially around the edges of downtown where you have existing neighborhoods where having residential adjacent to residential might be appropriate. So that's the recommendation that's within the text of the plan. There's nothing changing on the land use for downtown, but currently the downtown Crozet district requires a special use permit for ground floor residential. So we wanted to acknowledge that in the plan. And now I can pause because this is our last slide before the next topic.
Okay, thank you. Can you just go back to the first slide that I think Doug has a comment on, and we can have Doug and Tom and maybe get to this attendee that has a hand up for a while.
And I wouldn't be surprised if some other folks wanted to speak up as well. The reason I'm wanted to focus on these downtown neighborhoods is because of this conflict that I've seen in the notion of a neighborhood model that we have adopted for Crozet and has been well attended to by the new developments. But the fact of the matter is the neighborhood model, which calls for equal worth between pedestrians, cars, and bikes is just simply not possible on the older existing roads. And this has become even more glaringly apparent by the accident that occurred on St. George not too long ago, last week or so. Fundamentally, there was a change between 2010 and this draft that I think has been glossed over a little bit, or maybe I just missed it. But the notion that the neighborhood density in the past, in the 2010 CMP, was R2 and below. And that would have included virtually all those neighborhoods in that blue circumscribed area. And that density has been changed to where the neighborhood density low is now described as less than R2. Well, there's only one less than R2, it's R1, but you can't have a quarter of a family. But just because there may be more land behind some of these older homes, the roads do not support new growth at the expansion level that's being described in this document. And so it's impossible to have a neighborhood model inside these districts. And I think these neighborhoods should be characterized as neighborhood density low. And that means that they stop at R2. And if you want to build something more, you've got to ask if we can build something more. But that's the key issue that I wanted to raise tonight. That I thought that these areas inside the blue line should be characterized as neighborhood density low. I hope others agree with me. If they don't, I don't know what I'm doing here.
Thanks, Doug. Tom?
Yes, thank you. Listen, Ally, I don't honestly understand how we can go through this master plan and not look at each section individually, what we want and what we don't want. What we have now here are the words of the staff, not the words of the community. If you want, when I put my objections up for someone to remove, I'll make it a motion if that's what you want to need. But you know what I mean? Otherwise, what's going to happen is this, we're going to be here, we're going to be talking, it's going to go back to the staff and it's going to go forward the way it is.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to, I mean, Rachel said it was like a 20-minute presentation. I wanted to hear her point out the changes they made based on the CAC feedback.
If that's what you want for
so
20
far.
minutes, I'll fine, I'll wait.
Yeah, I mean, because if we start going at, I mean, just if we start talking about individual words in the draft she sent, I just wanted to give them a chance to give the broad changes that they made.
Okay, Ali, but this is such a fundamental change that it's not just individual words.
I agree.
When you change the definition of neighborhood density low, this was new to me. And I only uncovered it by going back to the old master plan. Did I miss something? Rachel, what was your intent by changing that number?
So we haven't changed the land use from 2010 on any of these properties. They have, in 2010, they were designated neighborhood density, and we're carrying that forward in the draft land use plan.
You know, you've changed the definition of neighborhood density. You have changed the definition from R2 or less to less than R2. And it makes a huge difference.
Okay, but
Well, fewer houses.
it's not for these neighborhoods are not neighborhood density low, they're neighborhood density. And that's a 3 to 6 unit per acre recommendation. And we've carried that from
recommendation, but they, okay, fine.
Right, but I'm a little confused too, because I don't know, like, I mean, none of this is changing the zoning on those places or the land or the designation on these parcels, right?
That's correct.
But it does invite 3 to 6 units per acre in a neighborhood density that simply cannot be supported by the road structure that's there right now. it can't be supported.
Yeah, but it's
Ally,
but like you said, those people would still have to ask permission for those things, because we're not giving anybody permission to increase their zoning with this document.
Yeah.
My question remains, why was this definition changed?
Maybe I'm misunderstanding, Doug, but I don't, for these neighborhoods, with the exception of actual downtown, and with the exception of a few properties that are R6 by right, I think most of these properties are zoned R2, and the current land use and our current plan now says they can be 3 to 6. Now, so that would have to be a rezoning. But I think that possibility already currently exists for most of, I think almost all of this, except for something that already is R6, which is like the Pleasant Green property and the view. So maybe I'm misunderstanding, but to me I don't see that change.
It's simply a matter of looking at the CMP 2010, looking at the neighborhood density definition, and then looking at the new neighborhood definition under this draft. It's different.
Okay.
But Doug, you're talking about I see the change you're talking about for neighborhood density residential low, the very pale yellow. But I think the areas in downtown are the brighter yellow, which is not low. Neighborhood.
Exactly. And they shouldn't be bright yellow. They should be the paler yellow. That's exactly the point.
Okay. I think what maybe the confusion is that under the current plan, those neighborhoods are the bright yellow already. They're not pale yellow. So I see the subtle change in the pale yellow's definition of what it means, the difference between of less than 2 units per acre compared to whatever the current one is. I have to switch back and forth. So I don't think they're changing the maps. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, Doug, you're muted.
I don't think I need a lot of help here. I'm pretty convinced, but I'm just posing out there that the neighborhoods inside the blue dots should be described as neighborhood density low, because they do not have the road structure to support a higher 3 to 6 infill. And believe me, I know that everybody would have to ask, but if you lay out a plan like this, a vision for Crozet that says, we want to have this infill, people will come in here and develop this infill without any regard to the ability to support the roads. A little boy was hit on St. George. This is serious.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm just going to admit I'm still confused, but point taken. I will look at it, and I'm going to go ahead and let Albert and Laura talk, and then we will move on with the next session of Rachel and see where we get. So Carolyn, can you help with that? Thanks. Albert, I think you're up. If you unmute, you can talk. Albert, are you can you unmute?
Hi, I do want to say something. I'm sorry. So I appreciate everything you guys are doing. And
can you just real quick, can you introduce yourself?
Oh, my name is Ann Dessertine. I'm with my husband, Albert Dessertine.
Thank
you.
We
bought a house in 2013. We live in the west end of Old Trail. We love it here. And we are very saddened because we like this neighborhood. It's a neighborhood near the golf course, it's a neighborhood with people with the walking trail. And many of our neighbors are now having an empty lot that was proposed when they bought the property by something on the web as a park, now being zoned for commercial use. And I guess one of the points that was made earlier on in the conversation was you have a lot of lawyers, thank God. And I guess, how do you change rules after people buy properties for $500 to $1.5 million and not affect their property value or their quality of life, and say, I'm now going to put a church next to your house or a retail building? And what remedies do people that live in this community have? So you can't just change things when we bought a house in good faith.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like you're talking about the old trail change, which is
Absolutely talking about
later in our whatever discussion. And I appreciate you guys coming, and I think we'll have more comments, but I just want to say for now, just to your point, like the master plan doesn't give anybody permission to build anything specific. It's a vision document. So as much as I have already expressed that I'm not happy with the proposed change to that parcel, it's not as dire as you might have made it sound right then. And I think we can maybe explain that a little better when we get to it. If it's okay, I'm going to move on to Laura, and we'll get more into the old trail change in a little bit.
Thank you.
Thanks. Laura, I think you can unmute.
Hi, my name. Hi, my name is Laura Purvis. Can you all hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, lovely. So I'm going to ask my questions, but y'all are more than welcome to, put these to the side for now, or I just want to get them on record and they can be answered later, because I know that you have some constraints, and I've actually been part of these meetings before, so I totally understand on the presentation side. So I have two questions. One, with the downtown neighborhoods designation, is it envisioned that there would be ARB review with this at the level of like some of the overlay districts that are in Charlottesville? I wasn't quite understanding that piece, and I apologize. I'm kind of catching up from things. So
good question.
Probably had that before. And the other question that I have is the recommendation for a downtown neighborhoods architectural and cultural resources study. A lot of time in the master planning process, I've seen these documents done prior to the finalization of a master plan, especially as far along as Crozet is in its process. And so, recommendations as far as like, guidelines that the ARB and other places would use are often in those documents. So I guess I'm kind of curious to see how the county envisions that resources study playing out in the timeline that they would potentially envision for that as part of this new overlay, and how that would inform. So anyways, that's kind of a complicated question, so it can be later. I just wanted to ask it.
Okay. Thank you. I don't know, Rachel, I'll hand it over to you if you want to respond to that or move on.
Sure, I can respond quickly, and then Laura, please reach out and we can connect and talk about this more with the follow-up conversation. But just real quickly, we've removed the downtown neighborhoods overlay. So I just want to clarify that. So there's no longer an overlay in the plan. We just have some narrative in the text now, and then a recommendation about an implementation step. So the implementation step you referenced in your question was a recommendation for that study. So that would come after the master plan is adopted, and the board would have to allocate resources for that study to be done. And so perhaps coming out of that study would be a recommendation for some level of architectural review, and that could possibly be an architectural review board or a similar type of committee. But that's work that would follow after the study and follow after additional community engagement. So again, please reach out, and we can get your email and we can follow up and talk about that more. But I'm going to move us on to our next topic, and that is the middle density residential category. So we're going to go through just again some of the context and background that we use to develop this category. We have your 2010 master plan guiding principle about the housing stock and choices and affordability, the connection to our neighborhood model, which has been referenced previously in this meeting. The neighborhood model principles come from the county's comprehensive plan, Those are applicable to all of our development areas. So we'll continue to carry that forward. And then in our comprehensive plan, we have additional guidance about creating consistency across master plans, as well as some housing goals and providing levels of affordability across all of our development areas. And getting into some of the feedback we've heard, oh, sorry, our next slide is just a little bit about kind of the research and data pieces that we did to develop this new category. So we did some research from peer localities and other localities in the state and region. We looked at some research from other planning groups. And one that we looked at a lot was the missing middle housing from Opticos Design, and some local examples here in the county. We also reached out to our local development community to talk a little bit about, what would it take for you to build some of these housing types that we're calling for in this middle density housing category. And they felt that additional density would be needed for the types of housing we're talking about, and we'll get into that in a minute, to be built rather than traditional development. And when I say traditional development, we see a lot of townhomes and single family homes being built, because that's where I think the development community has shared that they can make the most return on their investment. And so more density, they said, is needed for some of these smaller housing types to be feasible to make their kind of developments pencil out. So now the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about some of those examples. We've shared these previously, so I'll just quickly show them again. Wickham Pond, again, not all of Wickham Pond, but one street in Wickham Pond has some accessory units within townhomes. So there's apartments within the townhomes. It looks like a townhome, but actually has 2 units in it. If you look at the density of that, it's about 27 units of an acre of that street and the adjacent parking. And then in Old Trail Village, again, not all of Old Trail Village, but one block that has single family homes with accessory units in the back. If you look at the density of that block, it's about 15 units an acre. So those are some local examples. We looked at a lot more, but we just highlight 2. If you move on to the next slide, some of the feedback we've heard kind of inspired us to develop this new category. So the vision and goals we did in phase 1, really a continuation of that guiding principle from 2010, looking at providing housing choice for residents or people who want to live in Crozet. We pulled feedback from the community survey, kind of two sides of the coin here. One is that there's not enough affordable housing, or increasing the availability is very or somewhat important to the community, but also limiting growth is really important to the community as well. So trying to strike that balance was what we were doing with this category. And then as we got into phase 2, we didn't have a middle density category when we started off with this phase of feedback, but some feedback we heard from the community kind of inspired us to think about a new category. We were talking about urban density residential, and the community really doesn't want to see some of the housing types that are recommended in urban density residential. I don't feel that those are in keeping with the scale of a lot of the existing neighborhoods within Crozet, specifically apartment buildings. And there was good support for some of the smaller housing types. So then moving on to phase 3, we had a series of CAC meetings where we kind of talked through the middle density residential category. Again, we still heard support for some of these smaller housing types, but when it came down to a vote, you all opposed applying the missing middle within Crozet. We had 2 planning commission meetings about the topic. There was support from the planning commission about the middle density category, and then we brought it back in January and we showed it applied to a map. And they did support applying the middle density residential with some suggested revisions. And one of that was really focusing on reducing the scale and providing stronger criteria that would encourage the smaller housing types. So our recommendation for middle density has changed based on kind of that feedback I shared. So when we initially brought it to you, it had a max density of 24 units per acre. We've reduced it down to 18 units per acre, but we have kind of 2 tiers within the middle density residential. Traditional developments that would come through, which would be, townhomes and single families, the type that we've seen quite a bit of in the community, would be capped at your 6 to 12 units per acre. And that's consistent with the urban density category as it existed in the 2010 plan, that range of 6 to 12. We're we added a second tier that developments could get up to a density of 18 units per acre if they provide the middle density housing types that we call out here. And those types are bungalow courts, small multiplexes, accessory dwellings, live works, and small single family cottages or tiny homes. And then in the appendix of the plan, we'll have a lot more guidance about what that is. And we've attached those appendices to the draft land use chapter we put out that talks about unit sizes, square footages, defines kind of what these housing types are. I will add, along with the middle density residential change that we've applied to Crozet, we have changed the urban density residential category to be from 12 to 34 units per acre. And it's only applied in one area in Crozet, and that is the apartments in Old Trail that are already built and have that density already. So moving forward to the map where it's applied, these parcels highlighted are where the middle density residential has been applied. It's same application as you saw in September. And I'll point out again, the only vacant properties with this designation are the Whitegate Farm property and the property on 240, which has a pending application. It's called New Dominion. So that covers middle density. If you want to take comments and questions now, we can do that, or we can finish up the presentation. I'll leave that up to you, Allie.
Yeah, let's pause here for Tom.
Yes, so let me get this right. This is no longer the Crozet master plan. This is now the Planning Commission and staff master plan. Because we voted against the middle density, and here we are back with it again. The current master plan, if you read it, discusses fringe areas. And let me state what it says about fringe areas. Most of the periphery of Crozet development area is recommended for the lowest density development consistent with the rural area designation in the comp plan. The importance of Route 250 as a scenic byway has been reinforced throughout the public process. This recommendation supports the preservation of rural setting along Route 250, as well as the eastern portion of Route 240. I'm not sure what you don't understand or what you did misunderstood about the vote, because to me, and I think to the rest of the CAC, it was very clear what we were voting for. And if you're going to overstep your bounds and the Planning Commission is going to overstep its bounds, then I just don't know what the hell we're doing here. We might as well just let you do whatever the heck you want.
Anybody, Joe has his hand up, so I guess I'll let you go unless somebody wants to respond directly to Tom's comment.
Well, before Joe speaks, I just want to say, Tom, I completely agree with you.
So I guess one of my thoughts on Tom's comment is, I think part of the opposition that we had to the middle density is that it was actually substantially higher than what's being proposed here. The middle density, as I understand it, Rachel, is basically just swapping with the current urban density. And remember, at previous meetings, we had this weird flip where the middle density that was proposed was actually higher than the existing urban density. So we had a little misnomer there, and I think that's been corrected. I just want to say, I very much appreciate Rachel and staff's tweaking of the middle density category. I really like this definition. I think this actually gets at, I appreciate the form recommendations, the scale recommendations. I do think, I mean, Tom, to the point of whose plan is it, I do think a lot of this, in terms of the form guidance, tiny houses, accessory units, cottages, bungalow courts, that's the stuff that kept coming up at these meetings where we had people putting stickers on things and saying what they liked and what they wanted to see more of. My only disappointment here is that, well, one of the disappointments is it's in such limited places on the map. I'm afraid we won't get a lot of that. It's not really applied to places where there are likely to be cottages and bungalow courts. It's in places that are probably already destined to basically be townhouses. And so, Rachel, with that in mind, I actually have one sort of specific recommendation or one question. The description of middle density residential refers to, quote, small multiplexes. And then the description says larger multiplexes are not recommended. And yet when we get to the appendix and it's describing the form types, there are small multiplexes. This is on page 30. There are small multiplexes and there are, quote, medium multiplexes. And so I guess my suggestion or recommendation would be to eliminate medium multiplexes. If the idea is to restrict this to smaller multiplexes, and it specifically says we're eliminating larger ones, and the quote medium multiplexes have a footprint of up to 18,000 square feet, which seems quite large, but I'm having trouble envisioning it. But my suggestion would be if we can cut the medium multiplexes altogether. I don't think there seemed to be some inconsistency between the description up there and the form guidance in the back.
Joe, we voted on this. I mean, I understand.
Well, Tom, we voted.
I understand you like it, but we voted on it. If you want to redo the vote based on the new information, I think that may be something we should think about.
Yeah, Tom, the only thing I'm not averse to that.
What about the current?
Let's let him finish, please, Tom.
I'm just suggesting, Tom, that the thing we voted on previously is actually, it's been changed. It's not what it is now. We voted on something that is now different than what it is now. And if we want to vote again, I think that's perfectly fine if we want to redo that.
Thanks, Valerie, and then Brian.
Thank you. I was going to make the same point that Joe did, that this is now, I think, makes much more sense in terms of having the middle density at a actual middle density level compared to the urban density. So I think that's a big improvement. But I guess I want to make a more global comment about, sort of input generally. Obviously, our input as a committee is important. That's what we're all here for. But I think it's important for us to also remember that we're just a small sample of the Crozet community in the larger county. Rachel and her colleagues have been hearing a tremendous amount of feedback from a variety of people in the community that don't necessarily come to the CCA meetings or participate. And so I think it would be helpful if we just keep that in mind and know that we're not a single voice that makes all these decisions, that it really is a community document, and there's a variety of input from a variety of sources. And I just want to reiterate that and try to not have this be an attack on the staff. They're doing their job to listen to everybody and make these decisions as best they possibly can, given their planning professional skills and experience, and trying to address a wide spectrum of community input.
Yeah, however, the CAC is appointed by the board to be a committee that specifically informs on master plan. So I do think that, like, and that's why we have 70 community attendee meeting at this meeting. So it's not for nothing that we had taken votes on the changes. But I also appreciate staff coming with these changes, and I certainly don't consider any of my comments attacks on staff, and I respect their professional opinions and the other feedback they're getting, including the voices of developers and other stakeholders, which are important.
I'm talking about the variety of everybody in the whole community, Ali. Our voices are important. I reiterated that. I know we're appointed by the board, but I think it's important that not everybody's opinions are reflected here. There's a variety of inputs from average citizens in the community of all walks in life and professions and
sure. And then I hope that, like you said, it's everyone's chiming in to Rachel. Brian?
My point is, just because the certain things in the document may not necessarily reflect exactly what certain members of the committee have voted for, doesn't mean that it doesn't reflect other opinions from the broader
right
community.
And I don't think that I don't think that that's what Tom's saying either, so I just want to move on. Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Ali. I really like the bungalow courts, the accessory dwellings and so forth. My concern is more that it's getting applied to the fringe areas when these densities are what we need closer to downtown. And, Tom's right, we did vote against it. The staff has made an effort to make a significant change in it. And it might become more appropriate now, but not if it's applied at the fringes. It totally undoes the primary principle of the master plan of trying to drive development toward downtown. And we're talking about pretty serious density here. It gets better if we follow Joe's example, and it's and we eliminate the medium category. But still, it's a serious concern. Thanks.
I've lost track of hands, but Tom and Joe both have.
I think we need to move on, Ally, and finish the
Okay.
presentation.
Wait. Ally?
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah. Let me just respond to Valerie as far as that goes. Valerie, I know you're a real estate lawyer and I think you have a conflict of interest, but that's just my point of view. But the fact of the matter is that all of the votes that we've taken are completely consistent with the Crozet Community Survey that was done a year ago. This was done under the auspices of the head of the research department at the University of Virginia, along with Sean, Tim Tolson, both who have developed in poll, have polling experience. So there is adequate background from the community. Over 700 people responded, and we did the survey not only in Crozet but in the surrounding area of Crozet. So to say that, well, we're just a little group and we don't represent the community, but no, but our votes though do reflect what was in that survey.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, let's go to the next section, Rachel.
Michaela Carty is going to cover this.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ally. So this next section is going to follow the same format that Rachel's did, and I am definitely mindful of time, so I'll go through this as briefly as I can. But for some background on planning and countywide context, looking back at the 2010 Crozet Master Plan, there's a green space designation that's used to refer to all existing and proposed parks, as well as public and private open space and sensitive environmental features. And several of the parcels in the Crozet development area were designated entirely as green space on the 2010 future land use plan. And many of those same properties are within private ownership and are zoned residential. They're not planned for future public or private parks or open spaces and don't contain environmental features entirely. And so that approach can cause confusion and pose challenges for property owners and neighbors who are trying to understand the future development potential of residential properties around them. So this approach used in 2010 is not consistent with other Albemarle County current master plans or the comprehensive plan approach. And on this slide, there's a couple comprehensive plan strategies that are relevant to the green space approach that I'll talk through. Which is creating uniformity in the land use categories and format across master plans, using development area land efficiently to prevent premature expansion, and then the parks and green systems designation overall. And we really started talking about specific green space parcel changes in this current phase of the master planning process. And through the CCAC meetings, we heard support for separating green systems and public parks into two separate land use categories for clarity about the future use of sites across Crozet. Though when it came to making changes to individual parcels, there has been mixed support, some broad support for certain parcel changes, mixed support for others, and opposition to some of the parcels. So we didn't hear consensus across all of Crozet for a revised green space approach from the CCAC. We also shared the votes that the CCAC made at the November 30th meeting with the Planning Commission at a work session on January 12th. And during this work session, the Planning Commission recommended applying green systems designations consistently across Crozet so that they reflect environmental features. And when I talk about environmental features, I mean steep slopes, stream buffers, and floodplain areas. The Planning Commission also noted the importance of maintaining habitat corridors and connections to the rural areas across Crozet. And so given this planning background and the community input we heard from the CCAC and others, as well as the Planning Commission, the current draft has two designations: green systems and public land. The first, green systems, that's on the screen, is used exclusively for areas that have environmental features or is land planned for privately owned open space. The goal of this approach is to be consistent in the application of the green systems designation across Crozet and also to ensure that neighbors and property owners clearly understand the development potential of residentially zoned properties in Crozet. The second category is public land, and this is a designation used exclusively for existing and proposed county-owned parks, trails, and greenway systems. I have a quick slide on the overall future land use plan that's in the draft right now. And this is to highlight that this retains a green network throughout Crozet that's similar to the 2010 master plan, acknowledging the importance that we heard from CAC and community members early on in the process about a network of public and private open spaces and connections to rural areas. So this slide here shows the parcels that are not faded out are those that were designated entirely as green space in the 2010 master plan that have existing residential zoning on them. In alignment with the Planning Commission's recommendation, we've consistently applied the green systems designation to refer to privately owned open space, usually for residential developments that have their private open space that's not generally open to the public, as well as environmentally sensitive areas such as steep slopes, floodplain, and stream buffers. As you can see, these parcels have some updates to them to reflect the development potential or existing development on them. The tan color is the neighborhood density residential low, and the yellow is neighborhood density residential. And this map builds upon those. It adds a few additional parcels that were cleaned up, meaning that the green systems designation is aligned with the environmental features that are on the site. County engineering staff are also in the process of verifying stream locations and buffers on a few sites throughout the development area as part of this work. So there may be changes associated with that. We'll of course let the share with the CAC and the community what those changes might be. But again, this is just to ensure accuracy of understanding environmental features in Crozet. And that is the last slide on this topic. So if we're still wanting to pause at different moments in the process, I can stop here before sharing with Lori.
Did anybody have any comments on this particular section, Anne?
One quick question for the area, the tan area along 250, that is still remaining, and it's whatever the super low rural is, the unchanged from current, correct? And it's just had its buffers and critical areas removed. Because do I understand that correctly?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
good. That's ideal. Thank you very much.
I don't see any other hands.
Just a quick comment, Allie.
And that maybe Charles Diggins, if you have a comment on this particular section, we can unmute you. Go ahead, Brian. Brian, were you talking? Or we can take Mr. Diggins and then maybe we.
Yeah, I'm just a little confused about steep slopes and streams because I'm not sure about the other areas, but they seem like a lot of blue there. But I know the area down by 250 has very steep slopes and stream buffers. And I'm just wondering why this is seeming to ignore that definition.
I can take that one. Steep slopes are defined as the slopes that are steeper than 25% slope. So all of those are captured as far as we're able to do using USGS topographic information. Sometimes a site survey can reveal, slight changes to those, but it's based on the best information we have right now.
County staff can be invited out to ground truth any areas where landowners think that there should be some other demarcation added. So that's what's happening around checking the buffers in the rest of the community too.
Okay, thanks, Anne. I hope that answered your question, Mr. Diggins. And Brian, you can comment and then we'll move on to the next section.
Yeah, just quickly, it's disappointing to see how much green goes off the map. On the other hand, I think this is more realistic. We learned that an awful lot of land that was shown on the previous one that was called green space was in fact becoming developed, and it was a misnomer. And at least this is more accurate. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Rachel, if you want to respond or move on, that's fine.
Sure, I think we're ready to move on to our last section, which is Old Trail, and Tori Canalopoulos is going to cover this piece.
Sorry, Allie, just real quick. I saw there was a Q&A, a comment about
Joe, I'm sorry, you missed my discussion of Q&A. We're actually not allowed to respond to. We left the Q&A open, but we're not engaging with the Q&A. It becomes part of the public record and in the minutes, but if people have comments, they have to voice them out loud. Thanks. And that also goes with the chat. The chat should be not used. So Sandy, if you want to make your comment out loud, we can engage in your comment that way. And yeah, I'll let Tori go on and then we can discuss.
Sure, thanks, Allie. So this will be our last topic before moving to a little more Q&A and discussion. So looking at our recommendations for Old Trail, we started with the 2010 master plan, which identifies Old Trail as a mixed-use center, secondary to downtown, should have a variety of commercial, residential uses. The kind of core area of Old Trail in the 2010 plan has the mixed use land use category applied to it, which in the 2010 plan is shown as pink. So calls for a balance of uses in those centers. And so looking at updating the plan, we were trying to find the best land use designations to align with the existing zoning within Old Trail, which its code of development outlines the permitted uses and densities by block. So we propose to have the community mixed use brown color designation replace the mixed use designation to reflect those permitted residential uses and densities in that core area. And also to better align with that designation in the Pantops master plan, which was the other most recent update. So next slide, please. So from our phase 1 feedback, which was around visions and goals in Crozet, we asked the community to identify the centers and destinations that they go to throughout Crozet. And we heard that people visit Old Trail mainly for shopping, recreation, and gathering. So next slide. And then in the phase 2 feedback, we had some of those in-person workshops and then moved to the online CCAC meetings. So, and with our public input feedback online as well, heard support for designating Old Trail as a village center and heard that it needs to continue to be a distinct and secondary center of activity compared to downtown. And heard the same feedback about why Crozetians visit Old Trail for those gathering, shopping, and recreation uses. Next slide. So then a little more detail for our phase 3 feedback. We started talking about some of these specific blocks and the development area boundary. So we've heard support for institutional uses in block 19, which is that block next to the schools along Route 250, but also heard concern about any potential commercial or retail uses, both in this area of 250 and just along the 250 corridor generally. We heard concern about potential increases in intensity of uses in that core mixed use area, especially block 26. And then we heard mixed support for aligning the future land use designations in Old Trail with existing zoning. So we also took this question on the application of these land use designations to the Planning Commission for the January work session and heard support from the Commission for a village center designation and support for how these draft land use categories have been applied to Old Trail. There was mixed feedback about adjusting the development area boundary in the golf course area, which I'll talk a little bit more about on the next slide, but some commissioners did not support that change and wanted to review again after the adjustment was shown on the map. So next slide, please. So keeping all of that feedback and 2010 context in mind, And existing zoning, our approach was to align future land use designations as best as possible with existing zoning and approved development potential. There's not a perfect way to do that since these land use designations do have a range of density and uses, but hopefully they get closer to what the existing zoning potential is on these properties and create more clear expectations for what can already be built under current zoning. So we'll carry forward the village center designation from community feedback and from the 2010 mixed use center designation, and then update the future land use designation for block 19 based on community feedback for interest in the institutional uses and based on the property owner request to evaluate that. And then just highlighting some of the main designation changes, which I will also cover with side-by-side maps on the next slide. So that community mixed use designation replaces the previous mixed use designation in a few urban density areas. Middle density replaces some neighborhood density and urban density areas in Old Trail. Again, trying to get closer to the actual approved densities. The development area boundary was adjusted around the clubhouse and restaurant. That was the only development area boundary adjustment in Crozet. And then block 19 is shown as split institutional and neighborhood density designation. So next slide, please. So these side-by-side maps highlight those main changes. So Old Trail is regulated by its code of development for its approved neighborhood model district zoning. So it regulates the number of permitted dwelling units and also the commercial, retail, and office uses by block. And so changing the future land use designation will not change any zoning within Old Trail or anywhere else in Crozet. So if a property owner wanted additional density or additional commercial, retail, office uses in any of these blocks, they would need to submit a rezoning request, which would require Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors public hearings. So looking at block 26 in that core area, it currently by right allows between 20 and 150 dwelling units. It allows all types of units, including single family attached, detached, and apartment buildings. And it allows up to 20,000 square feet of commercial and retail and office uses, including restaurants and hotels. And then that block 19, closer to Route 250 and next to the school site, currently allows up to 90 dwelling units. And the only non-residential use permitted right now is a farm stand. And so the split institutional designation is meant to show potential for future institutional uses with a rezoning. And then the development area boundary was adjusted on that west side. It in the 2010 plan is cutting one of the buildings in half. So this adjustment is really meant as a cleanup. It now includes both buildings, which are both on public utilities. But that green systems designation was kept with the adjustment. So that expanded development area boundary is still designated green system. So there's no change in the recommended uses for that area. So next slide, please. So to wrap up, these are the next steps. So as Rachel mentioned earlier, we'll have an online form available either at the end of this week or early next week for additional online feedback and review of this chapter. And that will include the opportunity to go ahead and get really into the text and make comments on specific language and lines. If anyone wants to do that, there will be an upcoming Board of Supervisors work session on this draft land use chapter on April 7th. We'll have continued online feedback opportunities for transportation and conservation on public input, and we're going to start working on compiling those draft chapters available. So there'll also be opportunities to read through those and comment on them in upcoming weeks. And then our final chapter topic, implementation, will have a virtual community workshop in May. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Allie for questions and comments.
All right, thanks. I think maybe we might need that Old Trail map if there are Old Trail specific comments, but Joe, I'll let you go ahead if you still have a comment, and then we'll go to the attendees.
Yeah, just real quick, on the block 19, that's the one that's up against 250, I believe, right next to the schools.
Yes, that's right.
Is the plan for that still the Crozet Play, or the Crozet Sports facility, and does the institutional, is that designed to accommodate that use?
So that rezoning has been submitted. I'm not sure where it is in the review process. I think it's kind of in deferral on pause, but yes, that type of use could be considered under the institutional designation.
Okay.
All right. I think we could go Lillian. Just on that list, Lillian, Adrian, Matt, and Devin, and committee members can chime in as well. Lillian, you can go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name's Lillian. Thanks for taking my comment. I put it in the Q&A, but I also just wanted to make a comment in person in the meeting. I have a little trouble reading the maps. They're so small and I have a little bit of trouble understanding them. But when I looked at the current draft map versus the 2010 draft map, and I'm looking at the property that is off of Catharos Lane, that's in between the boundary of Old Trail and Crozet Avenue. And it's like a bright yellow now, the much bigger bright yellow area than it was on the 2010 map, which my best understanding of that is it's been drafted for, yeah, that area right there, that's bright yellow. Neighborhood density, 3 to 6 dwellings per acre. And that looks like a increase from the 2010 map. And my understanding is that the current owner is considering putting that under conservation easement. So I don't understand why we would. And then I attended the last meeting and there was a lot of support for deferring on changing anything on that until we found out more about what was going to happen. And maybe that could be preserved as open space or more rural or conservation easement. So I'm pretty concerned about changing that if it might in any way disincentivize the current owner to put it under easement. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't, we've commented on this parcel before. I was also a little surprised. I don't need to go into it, the fact that it doesn't make sense for there to be conservation easements within the growth area, but this adjacent conservation easement predates this. So I thought it was kind of a moot point. I was kind of surprised that it's still in this recommendation because it sounded to me, and from what Anne said, and I think Valerie was involved in the sale, that was pretty much already in process. So I guess I echo the comment that surprised to see that yellow there. Anybody else is welcome to jump in, but we can go to Adrian.
Hi, my name is Adrian Brown. I live in Old Trail in the West Village, directly across from Block 26. And so I have concerns about the change in designation because in 2010, part of Block 26 is pink and part of it is orange. And when we bought our property, we were told and saw maps that the developer had that there would be a park there, and then across on the other side of the park would be homes. Now, they didn't know what homes, of course, but they would be homes. So I'm just wondering why you would move that, change that demarcation and designate that entire block the same. Can somebody explain that to me, and also explain to me why I shouldn't be concerned about much more dense and big buildings being built across from my house when really it should just be houses across from my house in a park? Because I heard you say, Allie.
Yeah, I mean, I've said exactly what you've said at previous meetings, and I've been told that it really isn't a change, but it's just hard to understand when you see the change between these two maps that are on the screen right now. So I'll let Tori answer again, because yes, I agree. It's still not clear to me why we're changing Block 26.
Because it does look like it's a change. If
I
you look
agree.
at placeholders in the document online, a placeholder with the original designation is much less dense, and the new designation placeholder, you know, looks like somewhere you drive to go to a doctor's appointment in a parking garage. I mean,
I completely agree. So I guess if Tori is covering this chapter, maybe you have another response.
Sure, I can respond. So just again, with these Old Trail land use categories, there's not going to be a perfect match. But a lot of the 2010 ones are just not in alignment with what can be built by right. So I can't speak to what the property owner intends to build in this block. I'd have to go back and look at the application plan and see what's required. But I don't know if there's a specific open space required in that block. But from a zoning standpoint, they're allowed to build any of the residential and commercial and retail uses that are permitted in this block. So it would be up to the property owner to choose what they want to build there. So with the current urban density designation in the 2010 plan, if I did very rough math on this, but it ends up with a range of a net density of 31 to 63 units. However, by right, it can be up to 150 units. So having that community mixed use designation gets a little more into that realistic range and includes those other types of uses that are allowed, such as restaurants and those retail commercial uses that could be today built by right. So again, I'm not sure what the property owner's intent is for that block, but the land use designation change is just trying to get closer to the existing current zoning.
okay, so while, if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is what's designated there in 2010 under land use designations isn't really reflective of the rights of the property owner and what they can build. And that the change to the 2020 document, the draft changes to Brown, more accurately reflects the property owner's rights to develop by right. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what
okay.
That's what they've said. It just seems like an unnecessary change to me, since this is a vision document. It seems like if we change our vision, then we are more incentivizing those kinds of development. But it's like Tori said, it's already without going, without really studying this myself, it seems like it's already possible. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I just wanted clarification. It seems then that the homeowners in this area have a beef with the developer then.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Perhaps.
Exactly. You're right. Okay.
All right. Matt. If you could introduce yourself too, I forgot to, go ahead.
All right, I'm Matt Help, born and raised in Crozet, live off St. George Avenue. So I'm gonna drop about 14 things for y'all to consider. One, infrastructure. We've talked about it, we beat the dead horse. Sidewalks, bike lanes, parks. Doesn't matter what zoning you do, we need the infrastructure investments, period. No more ifs, ands, or buts or excuses from the county, period. Number two, whatever zoning allowed the development of the apartments on Jarman's Gap Road or the intersection of Jarman's Gap and Blue Ridge should be banned from Crozet permanently. Frankly, it should be demolished. If we're gonna say it's providing low-income housing, I would love for the county to actually produce a survey that shows that any of the residents that moved into those apartments were former residents of Crozet who needed low-income housing. Three, the huge retaining wall that is in that apartment complex is an embarrassment. It's a blight on our community. There should never be any other development ever in our town that allows any sort of retaining wall that looks anything like that. It's hideous. The developer should be required to plant vines all over it, do something. It's it's atrocious. It's unacceptable. 4, I don't think the downtown neighborhood is a neighborhood. At a minimum, it's a zoning area, but you should take the neighborhood out of it. That neighborhood is bisected by railroad tracks with no pedestrian access across. So by no stretch of any definition is that a neighborhood. Call it something else. The neighborhood, the downtown neighborhood area that you described, you've got parts of those neighborhoods that aren't included. However, those roads are exclusively accessed through that neighborhood. So that doesn't make any sense to me either. 6, again, Crozet does not have the ability to sustain growth until the necessary pedestrian, bicycle, parks, and green space infrastructure is met. For reference, I'm 36 years old. For the first time in my entire life, will there be a sign that indicates the crosswalk across Crozet Avenue at St. George Avenue? You know what that took to make happen? How many times did I call, email, and have site visits with the county planning staff and VDOT? Then I had to get Supervisor Malik, Delegate Runyon, Senator Deeds involved. They put pressure on you guys. Still nothing happened. Then we had a kid get run over by a car, and finally, we had to fight to convince them to do a study and agree to put up signs. All they're doing is putting up signs. They're not even doing anything else, putting some paint on the ground and some signs. I could have done that in a weekend, but it took 6 months of arguing with county and VDOT to do that. And you still don't have anything on Wayland Drive in Crozet Avenue. Unacceptable. Other than Crozet Park, I believe all, and this is 8, other than Crozet Park, I believe all of the parks and trails are in sensitive environmental areas. If those areas aren't suitable for development, which I agree they're not suitable for development, maybe the master plan should encourage parks on other lands. 9, public lands don't exist on one side of the railroad tracks. Why isn't there a single park or green space identified on my side of the railroad tracks? 10, really interesting perspective from the Old Trail community. I greatly appreciate your sentiment, but I don't know that you recognize the irony in your statements. For those of us who grew up here, played in those fields, and had 6th grade science class in Slabtown Branch Creek, I'm glad you finally are opposed to more dense zoning. I would have preferred Old Trail not have been developed either, but we're about 20 years past that conversation. Number 11, Old Trail Block 19 should have been acquired by the county for future school needs. So should the lands around WAS that have been developed or proposed for sale. The schools are getting boxed in. Kids don't have space for ball fields, for track meets. The county needs to do something to acquire more lands around there. 12, I didn't see, and maybe I missed this, is there a spot reserved for future 3rd elementary school? In case anyone hasn't noticed, Crozet and Brownsville, they're overloaded. You can, I was the first class that went through Crozet School. There's only so many additions you can make before you run out of space. You need to have a better design. 13, I'm not sure how scenic is defined anymore, but the 250 scenic byway has been destroyed. And it's no longer not only scenic, it's extremely unsafe. 14, you've identified in one of those charts where people go. I think that's awesome. I would love to see you follow through with multi-use or shared use paved or concrete paths that connect people to those locations so they're not vehicle centric. I think that's everything I got right now, and I hope the county takes this seriously. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Great use of your time. I appreciate it. Devin.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. It's hard to act to follow.
Yeah.
So I'm speaking in the context of someone who lives in a home that faces onto Block 26. Certainly, this is an area that was heralded as being a residential area, and that area that was east of Orion Road, that area that faces onto the village center, was going to be commercial, and the areas that are west of that were going to be residential. And as somebody put it earlier, a sort of stepped residential, so that 1 or 2 level dwellings on, say, Adel Hill Road are facing onto similar 2-story dwellings across the street. So suddenly converting that whole area to this commercial use is, for lack of a better word, an abomination. I think the manure color that was selected for that area was appropriate, and the sort of bureaucratic language that has been used to describe all this completely obscures what's really going on. So let's make this, additionally, no one is talking about how bad the traffic is because of the pandemic. There's not a ton of people going from Jarman's Gap through the middle of Old Trail to the schools because the schools are closed right now. So if you add a bunch of commercial stuff in the midst of that, and then you've got all of the people crashing through from Jarman's Gap Road, it's going to be unmanageable. So except for those of us who go to work at 6 in the morning. So don't build a bunch of commercial stuff in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Devin.
You can unmute me.
All right, Tom, I know you've had your hand up. And if anybody else has comments from the committee on everything.
Yeah, a couple of things. Let me address one thing that Matt said. And it's interesting because it relates to this plan that's before us. And that's about the view. If you look on page 5, goal 2, there's 2 paragraphs in there. One says, work with Albemarle County housing staff to support affordable housing in Crozet through appropriate incentives and public supported partnerships. We tried this. We tried this with PHA, if everybody doesn't remember. And what did we got? We got the view and we got the destruction of a historic home. And that was after months and months of dealing with them. So as far as that goes, that should be removed. The next thing goes on, implement a priority review process to support development of new affordable housing and workforce housing. That assumes that there cannot be a badly designed affordable housing project. Well, the view is a good example of if that's supposedly affordable housing, that's a badly designed one and it's in the wrong spot. So those 2 should be removed. But that's one thing. I'm gonna go back to the thing about the issue about the middle density. And what I'm gonna do, Ally, if you let me, is I'm gonna make a motion that we not revote on the middle density housing density for that area. And we retain our original vote, because it doesn't make any sense to me. It's like saying the county, well, we'll just stick a knife halfway in your back, but not full all the way. So again, that's my motion.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you. Well, I didn't have a motion to revote, so I'll leave it at that for now. But I have some other business to get to, but I didn't really want to close the floor until on the land use changes and without giving the rest of you guys a chance to say anything. So anybody else from the committee want to comment or no? Matt?
Yeah, just really quickly. I appreciate that the staff is kind of introducing us and giving us a little bit of a pathway for the feedback that they're receiving. I'm hoping that there'll be some kind of documentation of that, either in an appendix or something. I know it's a lot of material, but just thinking about long-term transparency and accountability, I'd love to see those as a community engagement kind of wonk in a lot of ways. I really like to see, and having done a lot of that work, like it usually goes off into some void and you never see it ever again. But I think it's really important to kind of introduce that into the long-term historical context of Crozet, so that information can be referenced in the future if it's ever needed. So I don't know if that's a possibility, but it's something I'd be willing to help if I can work on.
Thank you.
Allie, can I just add there is actually a substantial amount more that's problematic.
I know. And I mean, I feel like, I guess I'm a little torn, but I feel like my inclination is to wait till the staff puts up their public input page and their feedback forum for us to go into specific comments. So I hope you'll take the time to put your comments there, and I hope everyone will, because that's sort of the world we live in. And I'm also thinking maybe we could even meet if we have a consensus of, or a lot of, if enough committee members want to meet and talk over our edits, so to speak, of the draft. I think that could be possible. So I think that's where I would leave that. I don't want to, I know that, like, I mean, I read Tom's edits, and Sandy and Doug all had edits, and I think everybody might. So I guess I'd like to spend time on once that forum is posted.
Well, you can post it, but the problem is that this is a second go around with the staff where they've come back with a plan that wasn't what was wanted by the community.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, but that's where, but they did make changes since the last time we saw it.
They made changes to their benefit.
And now we actually have text that we can look at. So it's not quite as theoretical as the last time we voted. So it's possible to actually get specific this time. So I have, I wanted to bring up, Matt, I don't know if you wanted to talk about the grant that you were working on. And also, I guess I'll just throw out real quick that the March 20, I hope this is still true, the March 23rd Planning Commission is an announcement for our attendees and panelists that the Crozet Park special use permit is going before the Planning Commission with a public hearing on the 23rd. Is that still true, Jenny? Do you know?
That is what was on our tentative agenda. So I don't know that it's changed. I think, to my knowledge, that's still true.
Just to bring that to everyone's attention, I know there's a lot of people that come to these meetings that have an interest in that SUP. So the public hearing for that is the 23rd. And Matt, I'll let you talk a little bit about that grant.
Yeah, I can be brief. So as a person that's kind of engaged in a lot of both community placemaking and community placekeeping processes, kind of locally and nationally, a grant came across my desk. And it might look familiar to a few people. It's the Citizens Institute for Rural Design. And it's a grant that has kind of two parts to it. One is like, actually, if you have a project that you want to pursue, they put some matching money. But the second part of it, which is what I was thinking in terms of the CCAC, is actually a section on kind of a design learning cohort. Just really thinking about how we could build some capacity within the CCAC to kind of better talk about this language, really think about how we communicate to the community at large, and trying to explore different ways of doing that in different ways, and kind of building on and supporting who I know are overworked staff, both at the community engagement level and at the planning level. So was proposing just like trying to submit something, which is the deadlines on Friday, just really focusing on recognizing the challenges that we're undergoing, and spending some time where a group of us could like better learn, have a better language, a better understanding of some of these design principles, and then I don't know how if it's early enough to actually incorporate them into the master planning process, but thinking about how those could help support and be communicated out in different ways. So that's what I was proposing, and seeing if there were others that were interested and kind of pulling together a small cohort of people to participate. I mean, who knows if we'll get it or not, but I wanted to kind of put it out there.
Yeah, so I've already signed up to join the cohort if we got selected for that. I guess I'd call it training. And we can, you know, if anybody else on the committee wants to do it with us, that'd be good. Jenny, did you have a comment, or anybody else?
Yeah, just Matt, it may be, just to let you know, when we did the original master plan, the county hired 17 consultants to do the plan and spent several $100,000 to do the plan. You know, and the plan has been good for Crozet up until recently when things have really turned south. And I'm not sure 17 more consultants is going to make that much difference, to be honest with you. And for the people in Old Trail, if you think things are bad now, wait till Crozet Avenue closes and you see the traffic coming at you again, because we don't have adequate transportation planning. Thank you.
Yeah, Tom, I think this is one thing. It's not about hiring a new consultant. It's about investing in our own knowledge of these processes and finding ways to improve how they go. I mean, we can see discrepancies and like questions about zoning and whatnot. It's that language, the language of zoning, and that's because I'm in a planning. I mean, I'm a PhD in the UVA planning department. I struggle with it myself. So, you know, finding ways to kind of overcome those language barriers is a huge issue, you know, nationally. And so if there's a way we could help do that, I mean, that's what at least my thought in terms of doing this, like, how could we invest in ourselves a little bit so that we could better engage the community about these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I saw it as the opposite of hiring 17 consultants as, but actually like building community engagement, you know, effectiveness. Jenny?
Yeah, I'd be interested in talking to you, Matt, and learning a little bit more about that. And I guess, I mean, I guess our time's almost up, but for what Doug was talking about earlier, I'd like to, maybe Doug and I can email each other so I can understand the part about a change that he sees in some of the areas that I'm a little confused, because I've been back through that again and I don't see that, but I want to follow up with Doug about that and make sure that we have clarity about that issue and I guess other things. And I wondered if staff can, so Doug, we'll get together.
That'd be great. I would appreciate that.
I just want to see what you're seeing.
It's an open question to me, so yes.
Yeah, okay. And then, or anybody else, of course, if they want to send me a message if there's something. But I wondered if staff could explain, and I know you had this on a slide, but because you were at Planning Commission and we had a work session with different content, and now you're going to move this to the board, it's a draft. Can you just give us go over again, if it's a repetition, that's fine, about when the draft will come back to the Planning Commission? Because one of the things I do remember from the Planning Commission meeting is, you know, it was a lot of information to cover and react to. And I know other commissioners felt like maybe it was a little bit in the weeds for them. And we were told, well, you know, there's all this more time because there'll be a draft, and now we have a draft. And I appreciate the work that staff have done on the draft, but I just wonder, can you just talk about what the process is as it leaves the group tonight?
Sure, I can speak to that. So we will go to the board on April 7th. There's not time to go to the Planning Commission first. So we'll get the board's direction, and then based on that, we'll make additional revisions to the draft. And then we'll come back around to the Planning Commission. We also have to engage the Planning Commission on subsequent chapters about transportation, conservation, and implementation, but we'll also come back around with a full draft. So I don't have those scheduled yet, and I don't know when they'll be, but we'll keep you all posted and informed about when those meeting dates are going to be as they're scheduled.
Where are you with that first, with that introduction chapter draft?
We don't have the introduction chapter drafted. I mean, we have some of the content in different pieces, but we haven't started drafting the chapter yet.
Okay. So it sounds like almost that will be last to draft.
I don't want it to be last. It's just we've got schedules on these other topics that we're kind of jumping from meeting to meeting. So we will fit it in as soon as we can. Yeah, I think it does provide some important context, and that was brought to light during this meeting. So
yeah,
we'll get that pulled together as soon as we can. But I don't want to make any promises about dates and when that will be.
Yeah, I understand. It's almost April 7th, but I do think that chapter is important for us to see, especially if we're going to go into detail with what's really been going to be voted on soon. I also wanted to bring up the pedestrian safety initiatives that have been, that Matt talked about. And we also got an email from a young community member on Hilltop about pedestrian safety and right-of-way donation. I just wanted to bring that forward to the group. About what the CAC can do to help facilitate pedestrian safety in these intersections that have come up tonight. And this citizen was talking about High Street and Tabor. So I'm just throwing it out to the committee. If anybody feels, we've talked about this in the past, like having subcommittees, and I mean, I know they existed in previous CAC times. So with the new term next month, maybe we could see if people are interested in reviving the subcommittees, and maybe these pedestrian safety initiatives could be a committee. So I just wanted to throw that out there. If anybody that's sticking around for April wants to kind of, the idea proposed was that, really the CAC as volunteer, activists in the community might be able to really take something on and help the county staff, not just staff, but transportation and everything, make things happen by in this case exploring right-of-way acquisition. Anne?
I am awaiting information about process from our transportation as well as VDOT to see if there are templates or any other guidance that could help Elliot's effort go forward. And we will have to be extra careful about any subcommittees that happen because of all the new rules for meetings that have
we
come
can't
from the
meet with
state. So
3 people.
that complicates things a lot. If it's a group of citizens who get together and do something, more power to them.
I guess it could be though that like one CAC member is meeting with 3, meeting with
citizens.
3. So we become a liaison to a citizen committee that is one of these topics. So maybe the CAC committee is only 1 or 2 people, and then they help organize. I mean, when we've got now 40 at after 9 o'clock attendees, maybe we have enough people that want to volunteer in that way, but not applied to be a sitting member of the committee. So I'm just throwing it out there as something more that the CAC can do.
I will share any information I get right away.
Thanks. Okay, thanks you guys. I'm done. Matt, do you want to have a last word briefly?
I just sent the link to more information so you all can take a look at that. It's brief. We'll see if we get it. I think they're looking for something a bit more tangible, but I think communication and engaging community can't be more important, especially at times like we're in right now. So yeah, let me know if there's interest.
I really meant Matt in the Matt help.
Sorry.
Wait, that was a good last comment too. Carolyn, can we unmute Matt Held again? Thanks.
Hey, Ali, I just wanted to say thanks for bringing that up. And I would highly encourage the county to figure out a way to increase funding for bike ped. For those of us who grew up here, we didn't have any challenges when we were kids. All the development that's happened has really been the cause of the problem. I go to Tabor Presbyterian Church, grew up on St. George. We could walk to church up until 20 years ago. Can't do that so well right now. And I don't know if the new houses need to pay an annual tax to pay for the investments, or if there needs to be a taxable business improvement district or some way to raise funds, because the current mechanism, Supervisor Malik can only get the board to fund so much. We can only get VDOT to fund so much, but we need a huge investment. So I just appreciate you bringing that up, and I hope something creative can be done to identify funding for all the needs that we have.
Well, I'll get in touch with you if we end up organizing some community committees. All right. Thanks, you all. Our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for April 14th at 7 p.m. Opportunities for the public to access and participate in the electronic meeting will be posted at a later date on the Albemarle County calendar page as usual, in accordance with Emergency Ordinance number 20A16 and open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. So hope to see you guys then, and thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.